If everybody can please turn off their cell phones. So while we have the presentation, that it doesn't get, nobody get disturbed. We do have a standing order here. If your phone goes off while somebody is talking, you got to come up and sing the national anthem. So I would suggest, in case you don't know it, I would suggest you turn your phone off. We need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No opposed. Okay, we're here to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, this is a gathering information. There won't be any public comments. So if everybody can just listen, and so we won't be taking any questions. Bob, are you first on the agenda?
Yeah, I'm trying to load this. Thank you, Mayor and Council. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the Watauga Water Intake with the Town Council. And we've assembled a number of people today to come present information to you, both on how we got to where we are today, some suggestions on where we think we should be going. We brought some financial people to you today to, if you choose to move forward, usually you ask me, well, how are we going to pay for it? So we brought some people here to give you some options on how to pay for it. And then ultimately what we're looking to do at the end of this workshop is I need the Town Council to give staff direction on where you want us to go. We've got some plans, we have some options, but we really need some direction from the elected officials what you want us to do next. So that's the purpose of the meeting. We're going to present quite a bit of information here. Please stop us if you have questions. And when we're done, we'll obviously take questions from the elected officials and then ask you for some direction. So the first thing I want to do is, before I bring our consultant up, is give you a little bit of what the scope of the problem is as we see it and how long it's been around. The town is required every year to submit to the state various reports on its water supply system. And back in 2012, the state the town submitted their report to the state, and it was declined. And the basis of that decision from the state's perspective was on predominantly on our water source, the fact that the town has had an inadequate water source, single source of water. And so this journey began in 2012. The town entered in 2014 through a resolution with the state to begin a process of planning to address the issues that the state had identified back in 2014. In 2015, the state from the North Carolina Division of Water Resources produced an analysis of future water supply needs and availability for the town of Beech Mountain, and that was September 1st of 2015. And I've asked for the gentleman who produced that report to be with us today, and Harold Brady, Water Supply Development Coordinator, produced that report back in September of 2015, and he is here today, and he will be able to go through his report and answer any questions you have. But I wanted to highlight some of those issues that were identified back in 2015 and why we're here today still working on this project. So if I could direct you to the screen. Again, this is in 2015, and these are excerpts from that lengthy report. And I'm quoting here, they say the existing water supply for the town of Beech Mountain is not adequate to meet its current or future water supply needs during drought conditions. And regardless of its future water supply sources, Beech Mountain is committed to reducing the high volume of water losses from its water distribution system and has already made significant progress. those are two things we're going to hit on today. We're going to have people give you information exactly on what's happened during the drought conditions, what our lack of supply has been, and just as importantly, the process and the projects we have done to reduce and continue to reduce our water loss in our system. This was an important quotation out of that report way back in 2015 that said even if all water losses were eliminated, that means zero, the town would still not meet its current and projected water supply needs. So most of our town residents and certainly a lot of the public believe that our high water loss that the town has acknowledged for a number of years is the solution to the problem, and it is not. We have a single source of water, which is Buckeye Lake, fed by a very, very restrictive watershed that comes down past Eagle's Nest. And if we were to have zero water leaks, which is not doable, I mean, every system has leaks, we still would not meet our current and projected water supply needs. That is not to say that the town is not going forward in reducing its water leaks. We have been doing that. We continue to do that. In fact, we have a bid opening this week to replace another $2 million worth of water mains. We'll be bringing to you in this budget process a project where we will be going out and replacing service connections. Daniel Davis will speak to you about how we've replaced the water plant, we've replaced the distribution lines, and now the piece in the middle is the service connections for every water meter in the town. And we'll explain to you why those are leaking and what we're going to do to replace those. That's an important conversation to have, but I want to again remind you that back in 2015 it was identified that the elimination of all of our leaks does not provide a secondary water source. It does not provide an adequate water source for the town of Beech Mountain. So in the limited, then we've been asked for years to drill wells. We need to, of course, investigate and drill wells because many communities use well water. And we have drilled wells, as you're well aware, and we continue. We have 3 wells that are scheduled now to be put in the ground this year. But in the limited groundwater availability assessment report prepared by Analytical Services, Inc., low to moderate well yields are typically encountered in the area of Beech Mountain. The likelihood of low yielding wells would make this option not practical. That's a study, that's an engineer, a good analysis. However, until we put holes in the ground, which we have done and all have failed, we have 3 more wells we're putting in this year, which quite frankly, what our intent is to do is to be able to answer once and for all, is there sufficient water supply that we can get out of the ground through wells in Beech Mountain? That'll be contained in this year's budget. We'll begin that almost immediately. And what we want to do is either find water, which we haven't been able to find in the past, or check the box and be able to tell all that we've done our due diligence and we've looked for water and it's just not there. That's not an option. So we need to answer that, and in September of 2015, that was an important observation. So then we go to the Watauga River intake, and the report says an intake on the Watauga River appears to be the most practical solution to providing a supplemental source of water for the town of Beech Mountain. Close quote. Again, another section, withdrawals from the intake would only be conducted when necessary. And this is an important point that I want the council to know. The plan has never been, and it is not, to draw water daily out of the Watauga River for our water plant. The energy cost to pump the water is far too great to make that an efficient method of getting water and treating water for the town of Beech Mountain. It's far more economical and makes a lot more sense to take it out of Buckeye Lake when possible, which is, we estimate about 300 days a year we would use the lake. During drought conditions, about 60 days a year, we would need to pump water through this system from the Watauga River. that's an important distinction to make, because many in the public and many of our residents believe that this would be our sole source of water, and that we would draw, and Benjie will tell you how much water we're talking about, we would draw millions of gallons a day from the Watauga River, and that's not true. We would use it when drought conditions made it impossible to draw out of Buckeye Lake. And more importantly, Benjie will speak to you about our new lake discharge permit. We're required to discharge water down Buckeye Creek from our water supply to maintain the environmental conditions of Buckeye Creek. We cannot allow the Buckeye Creek to go dry, and in drought conditions, when the lake falls and we have no water coming in, the water falls below the spillway, and we've discussed this in the last months, we're unable to.
At what point will the public be able to ask a question?
None. None.
I don't know.
I thought this was the United States of America.
Right.
I thought maybe we had free speech. You're telling me I drove all this far, I flew up here from Florida, and you're telling me I can't speak.
Correct.
Sir, it's not a public
It's
hearing.
it's not a public hearing, so there's
There's a few
nothing.
things you need to know before this is over. I'll tell you.
The issue of drawing down and maintaining the release of the lake is extremely important. We were just reclassified by the state for our release. We've talked about that permit, and to be able to do that exasperates the issue of water in the lake. This is an important point that's contained in that a significant portion of any water withdrawn from the Watauga River would be released downstream of Buckeye Lake to maintain the required minimum releases with the creek. I just explained that so that the perception is that Beech Mountain will be taking water out of the river, and it would be reducing the quantity in the river. A substantial portion of that water is returned to the river. The two most important things are in the conclusion of that report, and basically again says Beech Mountain's current water source does not provide for the health and safety of its customers during drought conditions. That's exactly why we're here as a town, to handle the health and safety of the residents of the town of Beech Mountain. And that's an important conclusion in that report. And continued efforts to reduce water loss from the distribution system, continue efforts to reduce water use by the system's customers, and a supplemental water intake on the Watauga River was deemed to be the conclusion of the report. And other than the Watauga River intake, the system loss and reduction of usage by our residents has been underway for a number of years, and you're going to hear about that today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Benjie from West Consultants Benjie Thomas, and he's going to update you on where we are and where we've been. I'll get
And you take the microphone closer to you.
All right. Okay. Well, good afternoon. Yeah, I'm Benjie Thomas with West Consultants. I see a few new faces on council, and pleased to be here before you today. And Bob's done a very good job of outlining what we're here today about, and really this report I'm giving you now is just a little more detail of the same bullet points that he's talked about. And this is what I presented October 2018 to the council at that time. So there are a lot of same information, but some of it is updated, in particular the new minimum release requirements that the state and the Corps of Engineers have issued. So here's just a picture of your beautiful Buckeye Lake and the water treatment plant adjacent to it, and that in the foreground was the clear water, the storage tank. Here's another view of the lake. It's a little bit hard to tell, but the air there helps you see. That's normal. If the lake is full, that's what it looks like, and that concrete wall you see is actually is just beyond the spillway. So the water's up to the spillway and it's going over the spillway, and that's of course how it looks most of the time. We go on the next one. And this is a picture of the same lake in 2010 when there was a drought. And that's what you're looking at there is a stub out pipe. It's there's 3 intake pipes where the water plant's able to draw water out of the lake and pump it to the plant. So this is the middle of the 3 pipes. It shows how the water levels drop significantly. And this
the river was dry too. I live on the river. It was drier than that in 2010.
all right, we'll go to the next slide. And here we see the similar view. So this is July of 2010. Stage 2 water restrictions were in place. And at this point, there's not a picture of it, but it kept going down even more. It got to the point of being only 8 to 10 inches above the third and lowest intake. All right. And here's again a picture of the spillway, and that's where you can see how far below it had dropped. At that point, this is August of the same year, and they'd gone to stage 3 water restrictions. At this point, actually, Robert's here, could probably remember and tell you, I assume the water level had gotten even lower. This is a picture after it had started raining. All right. So we're here to talk about, why does the town of Beech Mountain need another water source? Those first pictures really made it graphic. But there's more to it than just drought per se in general. As Bob mentioned, because this reservoir is a dam within Buckeye Creek, it's not an off-stream reservoir, it's an in-stream reservoir. So the town of Beech Mountain back in the 80s had to get a permit through the Corps of Engineers to build the dam to create the reservoir, and as part of that permit, you're required to release a certain amount of water below the dam every day. This is a picture of the downstream side of the dam, the outlet pipe. And this has always been a challenge since the day the dam was built. You can see there the current requirements. These are new requirements issued in just this past year in November. It's required to release between 0.61 and 1.64 million gallons per day. So it varies depending on the time of the year in order to support the trout. And it varies depending on how much, if there is a drought condition, there is a reduction in how much you have to release. But you always have to release some. And at lowest, you have to release at least the amount coming into the lake.
The requirement is less, the new requirement is less, is that correct?
Ma'am, there's no comments.
It's just a question.
And you can see right there on the slide,
It's just a question.
it's going to be on another slide that's coming up. It mentions what it used to be. Another reason is just redundancy. Even if you had a lot better water supply, it's always good to have a second source, something you can go to when the unexpected happens. Reasons such as obviously a drought, but there are other reasons like number 2 there. You have contamination such as a chemical spill, some serious erosion upstream, a wastewater spill, these kinds of things. Number 3 is just a failure of equipment. If you have the dam itself has a breach, a failure of some sort of your equipment at your intake, the pumps, the screens. And if you go to the next slide, we'll see actually that happened in November 2018. The drain valve failed when it was trying to be exercised and worked on. That was a major event. As you see, it drained the whole lake. And, that was not a catastrophe in terms of like a flood or something, but it was maintenance, but things happen. Things can go wrong. So it's always good to have a second place you can go to for your drinking water. All right, next slide. Another reason is growth. I mean, that's not a primary reason. It's not what the primary goal is, but it's something to keep in mind. If you want to grow at all, even at just a moderate 2% per year, you're going to need 500,000 gallons per day of capacity. You just don't have that now. All right, we can go to the next slide. So next we'll talk about what are some things that can be done to address the situation. Some possible solutions are, A, reduce your water use. And we'll dig into these a little bit more. B, expand the lake itself. In other words, raise the dam or excavate more behind the dam. C, develop groundwater sources or wells. And D, draw from another surface water. All right, and so we'll go on to talk about some of these options. So reducing water use is obviously always a good goal. The town already has a water shortage response plan. That'll be the next slide. But on this slide, we're talking about, just as Bob has already touched on, the town knows it's got significant water leaks. It's bounced around between less than 50% to above 50% over the years. The most recent audit shows it at 57%. And we know there's mostly galvanized steel pipe in the ground. with service lines made out of the same thing and with swing joints. But as Bob pointed out, it's true that, even the American Water Works Association suggests that about the best you can do with a high-pressure system like yours. So you're in the mountains, you've got a lot of high pressure on your pipes because of the topography. When you take the mileage of pipes you have, it's about 66 miles. And the pressures that you have, then the kind of what's considered normal leakage is 120,000 gallons per day, 0.12 MGD. That's about a third of your average annual use. So obviously, the town needs to improve, but that's kind of a benchmark that even once you get to that, you don't have enough sufficient supply. All right, go to the next slide. So there, though, we talk about water conservation. So the town has done it before and will continue, I'm sure, to implement its water shortage response plan, which includes at first voluntary and then mandatory restrictions on water use, depending on the water level in Buckeye Lake. And then the third area there shows some projects the town has been doing and is planning to do to help with water reduction and water losses. So the water plant itself that was rebuilt a few years ago is more efficient, so it uses less, it wastes less water. There was a $1.6 million Spruce Hollow transmission line project that replaced 2.5 miles of water mains and the services. There's 3.3 miles of water lines to be replaced in a project that's out to bid right now. We're going to open bids this week. It's a $1.74 million project. And the town has a goal, and Daniel will speak to this later, of replacing about 150 service connections per year, because we believe that's where a disproportionate amount of the leakage comes from. All right. Now this slide here is a table, and we showed this back in 2018, and the numbers have been updated. So this top row, and it's under the heading, the option of expanding Buckeye Lake, but it's also really kind of a summary graphic of what you have. So that's what that left column is, current reservoir. So you see there under the old minimum release scenario, where you had to release between 0.97 and 1.8 million gallons a day, your reservoir had no yield. In other words, if you look back through history, we did a model based on the Watauga River watershed. If you kind of apply that to your smaller Buckeye Lake watershed, you look through the stream gauge records for Watauga River and apply that to your watershed for Buckeye Lake since 1940 something. So kind of the ups and downs, the rain, dry periods, the wet periods. You model that. If you assume releasing that amount as you should, then there would be times you would have no water supply, zero. So with the new minimum release requirements, which are more reasonable, they're still very significant, but they at least allow the town to, during a drought condition, only release downstream what's coming in upstream. So you're basically not using any of the water, you're releasing what comes in. So under that scenario, you would theoretically have a 0.24 million gallons per day yield, which is still less than what you actually need. And I would say that 0.24 is probably an overestimated amount. The only thing we had to go on is this stream gauge on Watauga River. If you apply the square miles draining to Watauga River and then shrink that, to what's draining into Buckeye Lake, that's how the model's set up, but that's not really a proven methodology. That's just the best we got to go on. The town has put in stream gauges on Buckeye Creek just last year. And as that data is accumulated over the years, that will be a basis for what the true flow is, the low flow during drought periods coming into Buckeye Lake. But at the moment, we don't have that to go by. So I would dare say that's why we underline this, these are theoretical values. You probably wouldn't even have a 0.24 MGD yield during a drought at Buckeye Lake. The other two columns, if you raise the dam 10 feet or if you raise the dam 10 feet and excavated behind it, there's a kind of a finger of land that juts out into the lake. If you actually excavated all that out, it'd be a huge project. But even if you did all that, at best, you're up to 0.36 MGD, which again, I think that's probably on the high side of reality. But at least it gives you a comparison. You kind of see the effect if you did raise the dam or excavate behind it. So benefits listed below, obviously it would be nice in terms of you'd have more capacity if you raise the dam. You would not have to go through the reclassification process and all that goes along with creating a new surface water source. And then the O&M costs would be,
There are about 30 sewage treatment plants dumping water into Watauga. You'll never clean that water up.
Sir, if you keep on, I'm gonna have you removed.
Well, that's
So if you
fine.
wanna listen, no problem.
You can't silence me forever.
I don't,
And I'm gonna sue this town. I'm gonna sue them for the damages to my land. It'll be a class action suit.
sir,
of everyone who owns land on Watauga. You can't pull this water and grab off.
sir,
It's wrong.
I'm gonna ask you to be removed if you carry on. This is strictly for information. That's what we're trying to give you.
Tell the truth though. Tell the whole story.
Each person has their own theory, but he's giving you the right information.
All right, so the O&M cost would be probably a little more cost with a higher dam, but generally speaking, it would be similar to what you already have. So that's one advantage to this option. But again, it's not really a viable option, and it doesn't give you the total capacity that you need. And that really just lists the same things I just talked about, so we can skip on. Here, we're talking about groundwater. That's another option that might help. One, as mentioned, is well already been drilled there at the head of Buckeye Lake. That's not really a drinking water well. It doesn't meet the setback requirements, but it can be used just to supplement the water supply into the lake itself. More wells could be developed, and the town has been trying to do that. Daniel may speak to that later. But there's a lot of obstacles to that. There are plans, as Bob mentioned, to at least do some test wells to kind of see what the capacity might be. The next slide, I'll talk a little bit more pros and cons. So there definitely are some benefits to groundwater wells. Overall, should be a lower cost than a surface water intake, a second surface water intake, although you don't really know until you start drilling and finally get to the capacity you need. It may take 10, 20, 30 wells. It's relatively uncomplicated compared to new surface water intake, but it's not without its issues. There is an advantage of each well stands alone, so if one goes down, you've still got the others to use. Each one would pump into the system on its own. Some disadvantages are, of course, a lot of uncertainty. Even if you do get 50, maybe even 100 gallons a minute from one well, you really don't know what it's going to do 10, 20 years from now. Each well does have to be on land with a 100-foot radius around it that's totally clear of any obstructions, any structures, all under the ownership of the town. You got to get power to it, you got to get a road to it, so it's complicated. Each well may have different groundwater or water quality characteristics. You may have to treat each one with a different set of chemicals. All right, next slide. So if we talk about drawing from another surface water, there are, of course, other rivers around, but with the Elk River, it's farther away from the water treatment plant, and it has a smaller drainage area and less capacity than the Watauga River. So the Watauga River stands out as a very feasible option. And if it were used as a source, very little of its mean flow or even its low flow would be needed for Beech Mountain. So according to the United States Geological Survey, USGS, the river has an average flow of about 1.58 MGD, 7Q10, I'll read that in a minute, of 17 MGD. So the 7Q10 is the lowest stream flow for 7 consecutive days that would be expected to occur once every 10 years, or each year is a 10% chance that that's what would occur. So currently, Beech Mountain would only need an average of 0.4 MGD. Maybe in the future, about half MGD with just some small growth. And if you get a little bit of growth, and hopefully offset that with some reduction in your leakage. So it may just increase a small amount. So future demands are difficult to predict, but even at 3 MGD, that's not at all what we expect the town's going to need, but that just kind of gives a frame of reference. Even if the town were to withdraw 3 MGD, that would only be 18% of the 7Q10. So a very small amount. If you put that in perspective, with a withdrawal of half MGD would be 0.3% of the river's average flow. All right, next slide. And so here's just a summary of some benefits and disadvantages to this option. Benefits is ample supply. It is a high-quality water. It would be separate from your current source, so it's not. So if something goes wrong at Buckeye Lake, this source can still be used. Little interference with the existing plant during construction. So if you talk about raising the dam and that sort of thing, that's going to create a lot of problems trying to keep your plant operating at the same time. Some disadvantages, obviously, there'd be a high capital cost, some significant O&M cost, and then, of course, the reclassification of the Watauga River, which we'll talk about here in a minute. That would be required. And then, obviously, some extensive permitting. All I would say, not any worse than raising the dam. All right, so now what has the town been doing and what will it be doing to address the situation? Steps taken and underway. So the first is there's been meetings with Division of Water Resources over the past several years. This report that Bob summarized kind of came out of that. All right, there's been meetings also with the state and Tennessee Valley Authority. They have jurisdiction over the Watauga River due to its feeding into Watauga Lake. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and others to determine what the steps are to even do this permitting process to have an intake on the Watauga River. Number 3, taking steps toward the reclassification of the river. So the town did make an attempt to start that process several years ago. The county commissioners were then, and if you were to decide to move forward, they would be asked again to pass a resolution that land use restrictions will be enforced according to the state rules for a WS4 watershed. Now, WS4 is one of several options. That's one with kind of a compromise between being very restrictive and very least restrictive. So it would control the types of uses for the land that drain into the Watauga River within a certain area. We'll have some maps coming up that show you that. So the goal of that obviously is to protect the drinking water source from contamination. All right, we can go on to the next one. And some other steps that are being taken now, as we said, are drilling wells. And number 5, continuing to replace the older parts of the distribution system. And that's kind of just a recap there of what we've already mentioned. All right, so wanted to spend just a little more time on the addressing aging infrastructure, give you some stats there. So 66 miles of water mains that you have. You've got quite a few storage tanks, 8 pumping stations. There's about 2,200 service connections. They're about average 30 feet long each. So that's 66,000 feet of just service lines. So that's from the main to the meter. So most of these connections have galvanized steel pipe with swing joints. Pipeline replacement repair are imperative for the continued viability of the town infrastructure. All right. And in 2018, the town replaced 7,000. Should have worn my glasses, sorry. 700 feet of water main and 10 service connections on the Slopes Road project. In 2018, the town replaced 17,000 feet of water line between Spruce Hollow and Parkway. I mentioned that earlier. And in 2020, this year, we plan to replace 17,000 feet of water line in the Tamarack Charter Hills area, which include 142 of those service connections we mentioned. There's also a sewer project along with that to cut down on inflow and infiltration. So number 5, the utility department will also be requesting the start of a, sorry.
I've got my contacts, yep. It says the utility department will also be requesting the start of a service line replacement plan to span the next 10 years with the expectation of replacing 150 service connections annually, average of 4,500 feet per year. This effort would directly address water losses through the service lines, not waiting for the main line to be replaced. The service lines are believed to be the major contribution of water loss.
Thank you. I knew that's too much text on one page. I'm paying for it. All right, Beach Mountain is also a comprehensive plan that identifies further main replacement projects, and Daniel may speak to that later. All right, but getting back to the minimum release evaluation, that was a major undertaking the town did in the last 12, 18 months. So that water being released every day is what kind of controls or limits in a great way the capacity of your reservoir. So this new minimum release protocol does allow you to use more of the water during a drought situation, but you always have to release at least as much as coming into it. So there again, just wanted to emphasize that the theoretical yield under that scenario is 0.24 MGD. It may be only like half that in reality. All right, watershed reclassification. I know that's a very important part of potential project like this. If it were to go through properties in Watauga County within the designated area near the Watauga River, if they're already in the high quality water area, because that river is already designated high quality water and has like a 1 mile either side of the river is protected, has land use restrictions. Folks in that area would not see any new restrictions of any significance. Properties that are within the WS4 protected area that are outside the HQW, high quality area, would have new land use restrictions. So the net effect would be an increase in water quality protection because the WS4 protected area would be larger than the current HQW area. All right, next slide. So here's a summary of what those land use restrictions would be based on the state rules for a WS4 area. Elizabeth Countess is here today. She reminded me that bottom one, that high density development, that's the state allows that, but so far Watauga County has not been allowing that option, and there are other protected watersheds in the county. So we would assume they would not allow it in this one either, but that's something that could be discussed. But so assuming only low density developments were allowed, that basically means for housing developments, you can still do 2 houses per acre is the density. Any kind of multifamily or commercial would be limited to a 24% built upon area. That's your rooftops and your pavements. Or at the most 36% if you don't use any curb and gutter, if it's a sheet flow type situation. And of course buffers would be required. So others here can maybe speak to that as well, but in summary, it imposes some new restrictions, so therefore it increases water quality, but for the most part they're not a lot more restrictive than what that rural environment would have anyway, the way people would tend to develop that area anyway. All right, so here's some maps to help visualize that. So if the town were to proceed with an intake from the Watauga River, the most likely route, it's just to follow the existing roads, Buckeye Road and Buckeye Creek Road, and at least one, most likely just one, intermediate booster pump station would be required, and the potential site there is shown. It would just be along the road. The potential intake site would be Guy Ford Road at the Watauga River, just off 321. All right, next slide. And then here's a map showing all of Watauga County. You see Beach Mountain there, the middle left. You see the green circle there showing that potential intake site. And then the next slide is the same view, but shows the area that would need to be protected if the if the intake were allowed and if there was a reclassification. So that blue area would then be a WS4 protected area with those certain land use restrictions that were mentioned. All right, and then the next slide is a little different view, but it's still that same. You see that semicircle, that's that outer limits of the WS4 protected area. And then inside that, you see a green hatched area. That's the existing high quality water area. So again, the property owners within that green area would not see any, they would technically have two ordinances they had to comply with, high quality water and the WS4, but the net effect is the same. The WS4 is not going to be any more restrictive than the HQW. All right, and then I think that's all. The conclusion is the town of Beech Mountain will need one or more sources of water to supplement the existing Buckeye Creek and reservoir. Reduction of water demand and leakage is to continue, but this alone would not fully satisfy the need, address the need. It is recommended to continue with a three-pronged approach to address this need. Develop one or more groundwater wells if their yields are sufficient. The wells could provide at least a short-term supply. Continue replacing older water mains and service lines, and continue budgeting, planning, designing, and permitting for an intake on the Watauga River as the best long-term solution. Thank you.
Questions from the council?
Anybody have any questions?
Not at this time.
We're good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Benji. All right, well, that was an update from the last presentation with new numbers and new designation of, we added some maps and things like there, for those areas. What I'd like to do now is bring up Scott Leo from Parker Poe. He can talk to you about the various methods to finance a project like this, which could be in the $16 to $20 million range. And I wanted to have someone tell you what your options are there. Scott, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. I see some familiar faces from when we did a revenue bond back in 2015 and 2017. So just want to talk a little bit about what your options might be if you decide to move forward on a project, especially something this size. The primary, your primary option is going to be revenue bonds like the town did before. The town does have these existing revenue bonds, and as part of that revenue bond financing, the town set up what we call a bond order, which is a master document, which sort of talks about the way that the town operates its water and sewer system. Revenue bonds pledge the revenues of your water and sewer system, and so the bondholders, which in this case is USDA, they require you to make certain covenants about the way you run your system. The primary covenant, as you might imagine, is that you'll produce revenues enough to be able to operate your system and to pay the debt service on their bonds. And so to the extent that we go back and do additional revenue bonds, we sort of have to live within the context of the agreements that the town has already made within that master bond structure. That master bond structure also has some covenants in it about the way that you would issue additional revenue bonds that the town would have to live with if it went that route. Again, the primary one has to do with a financial covenant, and that is even after you issue the new bonds that you'll continue to raise rates and charges sufficient to be able to continue to operate your system and pay the debt service on the existing bonds that you've issued and the new bonds that you might issue for a new project. So the revenue bonds is going to kind of be a good option for you. The other main option for you is going to be general obligation bonds. And what general obligation bonds are bonds that you put on the ballot, and they are voted on whether the voters of the town approve them or not. And what they're voting for is that you're going to be able to issue these bonds for a particular project, and they're going to, and allowing the town to pledge its full faith and credit, basically your taxing power, which makes it, which generally makes it sort of the best credit you can offer, because you're promising to raise taxes sufficient to be able to pay back those bonds. Those bonds could be issued sort of outside of the context of that revenue bond structure. You would probably still use the revenues of the system to actually pay back those bonds, but because it's not the legal source of the pledge for those bonds, you don't have to live within those covenants. As you may remember from back in 2015-17, the local government commission does have to approve any bond issuances that you offer, and they have certain rules about the way that they allow you to issue bonds, primarily the term that you'll be able to issue those bonds on. As I mentioned before, the existing revenue bonds that you have are through USDA. I know Debbie is here. I mean, a great option for you is going to go back through the USDA process to issue those revenue bonds. One of the primary benefits of issuing through USDA is that they allow you to pay back those bonds over a 40-year period, and the local government commission will approve a bond issuance generally. Don't want to speak for them. Generally, they'll approve a bond issuance with USDA financing for that longer period of time. If you don't finance through USDA, they're generally more restrictive about the term that they'll let you issue, that they'll let you pay the bonds back over. So, for example, for a revenue bond, otherwise they'll normally restrict it to the 25-year, maybe 30-year period. For a general obligation bond, they usually restrict it to a 20-year period. So I know that USDA, for example, they like revenue bonds. I've seen them also finance through general obligation bonds, but I know that that's not their normal and customary way of doing it, and not sure whether or not they would approve that or not. That is pretty much the 30,000-foot level of what your main options would be for financing. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any at this point. Obviously, a long time between now and then as you work through the project particulars.
What is the difference in the carrying charges between the two bonds?
Interest rates have been dropping tremendously, and so it really depends on sort of when you're issuing the bonds. I mean, Debbie, you have any idea what the difference might be between revenue bonds? And I know the revenue bonds today, you said that the rate was 250, and that's for
Beginning April 1st.
yeah, 2.5% for those revenue bonds over 40 years. I mean, you think about that in the context of mortgage rates, that's pretty low. I mean, usually general obligation bonds will be a little bit lower than that because you're pledging the taxing power of the town. But in such low interest rate environment, everything sort of gets compressed because rates are so low. If rates were higher, that margin would get higher. Can certainly follow up on details of that. I don't know the rates off the top of my head.
Is there a charge to administrate the bond, administrate the fund?
Does USDA charge? No, not other than your normal financial accounting sort of stuff.
Based off what, percentage? How does it work?
No, it would just be your normal staff time. There's no charge for that particularly, no.
Anybody else have any questions? All right.
There's additional fees for general obligation bond.
Well-
Bond counsel.
Well, that's true. I mean, there's issuance charges. I mean, that, paying the lawyers and to get the bonds issued, that'd be the same for revenue bonds and for general obligation bonds. To put the bonds on the ballot, there's a process. Well, for each type of issuance, there's a process, but there's to put the bonds on the ballot, there's a process to go through about the way you authorize those bonds and get them to put up for voter authorization. That's true. But that's not sort of an administrative charge, just sort of your normal regular charges for issuing debt. Yeah.
Okay.
They're very interested in what the town is doing, obviously, on this issue, so thank you for coming today. So the next one's mine, Mayor and Council, public relations and education. The town has suffered from poor public relations and poor public education on this issue. We have not gotten the correct information out. We haven't gotten the exact planning on what we were looking to do. There was a lot of innuendo, a lot of rumors, a lot of things that just weren't handled well. and the town has suffered over the years and continue to suffer from that. Part of this proposal, if you choose to go forward, is I would ask you to give us direction. We would like to look for consultants in public relations that could help us with our message to the public, both to the residents and the community at large in Watauga County. And to that end, we would want to put together fairly soon in this process a good public relations campaign, and more importantly, a good public information campaign where the correct information is being distributed to the public. We can respond to questions, we can respond to concerns of the community. The town doesn't want to do anything that isn't transparent. The town doesn't want to do anything that's not above board. We have a need, we believe we have a good solution for it, and it requires us to be a good neighbor, and it requires us to make sure our neighbors know what our plans are and what we're doing. So part of our pitch to you today, if you choose to go forward, would be an acknowledgement that I'll come back to you to hire the appropriate consultants and firms to get a good public education, public relations endeavor out to the public. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Next, I'd like to give you some update on some actions taken to date, and I've got a list of people here that are subject matter experts, and I'd like to bring up our retired Public Works Director, Robert Heaton. He can talk to us about the water plant project that we took on. Robert, thank you.
Good afternoon, council, audience. I don't know if it's good to be back yet, but it's different. I've only been gone 3 weeks, so. They asked me to come talk about a little bit what we did in the past as far as doing things to help the water system and the infrastructure in it. Back in 2010, we had the drought. Everybody in this area dealt with it. It lasted longer than normal. We always have a drought in this area sometime in the late summer, early fall. This one started in May. As part of that, I brought in Rothrock Engineering to do a water and sewer study, to see what we could do to work on not only drought, but everything that we had from lines, plants, pump stations, electrical, everything to do with it. That report was put out in 2011. I believe it's still on the website if anybody wants to look at what those conclusions were. We had some very serious problems that we found while we worked on this study. One was water treatment plant itself. It was built in 1986. It was actually a package plant that was a metal tank plant. At the time it was built, EPA rules were not quite what they are today as far as treating. With the help of the operators at the time, we made it through those. We actually met current regulations in a plant that was built to do not even a tenth of that. But this plant was starting to rust. We had some issues with thin wall metal that we thought would fail. We had sonic tested, and they were close to failure. Mostly what's holding together was epoxy on the inside. So that's why we moved forward so hard with the water treatment plant. With the help of Benjie at West Associates, Mr. Rothrock, myself, the operators, Rural Water, we came up with the idea of the new DAF plant we have now because we are in mountain water. And it's an old technology, but it works really good on clear, cold water. And that's what we have, so that's why we ended up building that type of plant. We finished it a little over 2 years ago. It was almost 2 years to build it, I think. But it should last long. Everything is concrete. All the tankage is concrete. Everything inside those is either fiberglass, ductile iron, or plastic. So we should have a long life out of it. It's working very well, and it met the need. We didn't build a 10 million gallon plant. We were permitted. We built just a little bit over our permit of 1 million gallons a day in case there is some growth down the road, which could not be. But it will last the town for at least a good 40 years if they take care of it and we can keep the technology going in it. So that's where we are with it. The second thing I had on was the transmission line from Spruce Hollow to Parkway. When the town was built, and you can kind of see as you go through looking at stuff, what was started and as it grew out and was built out. Parkway is one of the original tanks when they did the old water plant on Tamarack. Spruce Hollow was added later to feed the backside of Pinnacle Ridge. When they did the new plant in '86, they put in Ashwood and Mill Pond. They sent it to Parkway. Well, Ashwood and Mill Pond, from the plant up until mill pond is 10-inch line. From Spruce Hollow to the Parkway, which covers 80% of the mountain, from one side on Pimple Ridge to over here on the Locust Ridge side, those two tanks feed 80% of the mountain. They were fed off a single 6-inch line. So it'd been in since the 70s. Excuse me. So what our idea was, we were actually going to put a pump station in and pump from Spruce Hollow over the Parkway, and then we figured we could still gravity feed it. So we went to a 12-inch line. We laid all that, did away with the old 6, and we actually started tapping off of it as soon as we got enough pressure below the grade level to get pressure to feed the houses, which is up on Village Road. So I don't remember how many we tapped. I think it's 85, but a lot of those were condos, so those are 2-inch taps. So they see multiple units. This was finished about 6 months before the water plant was, and has made a difference in that system, not only from the quality of us having leaks and breakages, but it has new service lines in it, which are actually a plastic. It was a double wall plastic, but it also helped fire flow in that area. We added 5 or 6 new hydrants to the existing ones that were there that were replaced. So fire flow has made it much better, but also operational flow for us to move water, because that actually feeds everything to the Parkway, which feeds everything on top of the mountain. The tanks behind the Public Works building, the tanks up on Oz, all that water comes through that line and comes up this way. So those are the two big problems we had then, along with redoing all the pump stations in between, new pumps, new electronics, new electrical gearing, new switching gear, generators. In that time frame, we added all that to those parts of the system. So they're fairly well. We did the pumps last year. We finished those. The only pump station we have not rebuilt is the one for Emerald Mountain, which is over here in the Meadows, and it's still doing very well for the time being. So it's got a little bit of life left in it. What we tried to do was follow a plan that we laid out. And I think one of the things that got messed up in our plan was we were going to do so much every year, or as we had funding to do. I got granted a Safe Drinking Water Fund loan a couple of years ago. So to get that loan, we actually incorporated 4 projects. And it got us off schedule from what everybody thought we were supposed to be doing as far as replacement. It's just, we got a very good deal on that loan, and we put it in, and it actually bids Thursday. So that's part of that 17,000 feet Benjie was talking about that goes out next week. So hopefully that works out well.
Questions for Robert? Anybody? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to bring Daniel Davis up. He's in charge of our utility currently since Robert retired. He's going to talk about some projects we have going forward. Robert talked to you about what we've done up to date, and Daniel's going to talk to you what our projects are going forward.
Mayor and Council, thank you for letting us come together and talk about this today. I kind of want to get us back to center. You know, you've got a lot of information in front of you today. Large decision to make at the same time. But, you know, we still come back to we have 2 chief problems right here. We don't have enough water coming into our watershed to feed our supply, and we have too much water leaving our water system. We have to approach both equally. We have to move forward on both accounts. We have to give commitment to both of those. In the past years, we began, as Robert was talking about 2010, we started recognizing the problems that were coming to the future. We started looking at water losses. We started trying to find where our leakage was occurring. First place is it coming from the town's pipes or is it coming from the people's houses? So one of our very first projects was the replacement of all of the water meters for each residence in the town, residential and commercial. And I'm happy to say today that we achieved that. We have very high quality, highly technological water meters that allows us to keep up with the usage from the water meter to the homeowners. Home protection's there, water supply protection there. We started mainline projects. Several of those Robert's talked about, several that you guys know about. You see us working in the roads, you know what the main projects are. The Spruce Hollow transmission line replacement, the Slopes Road line replacement, along with those things, what you probably did not see was crews out driving around the mountain with headsets and machines that they're sticking on the ground. We're not only replacing the water lines, we are also listening by standard technology to understand where our leakage is occurring. We're hunting the leaks. We're chasing them everywhere we can go. A water leak makes a lot of noise. You guys have seen pictures of, water flying up through the air from a main break or something like that. Even those that don't come up, large leaks, we should be able to hear. And we do make a current annual practice of that. We bring in the North Carolina Rural Water Association to help us with that, and we survey the system. Parts, pieces, or as a whole, many different times across the years, continuing to look for these water leaks. So we have looked on one end of the pipe, and then we have looked on the other end of the pipe, and we still have high water loss. So it is obvious that we still have to find the bulk of our water loss in our system. That's why you will see in this year's budget process a service line replacement program. Using process of elimination, we're simply trying to find where the chief bulk of our water loss is. With what you have heard, what you have seen us do, our remaining pieces is what Benjie talked about earlier, is the service lines. It's the 30-foot average that goes from the water main to the water meter. It comes, the construction is like much of our other construction, it's galvanized. It's also 3/4 inch galvanized, so it's a very small pipe that has been in the ground as many years as the rest. Threaded pipe, thin pipe, easily rusted. Also, at some time in the past, the decision was made to use an interesting configuration of pipe connectors to make a mobile service connection. That way, if we had an earthquake, if we had a little bit of ground shift, it wouldn't break the piping. What, in effect, that we actually achieved was to put 6 to 9 additional corrosion points into every service connection. It's obviously not working out for us. We're also targeting our service line connection replacement because of our annual daily workload. We spend 100+ days a year going and repairing service connections as they are today. It's a good indicator that this is a place that we can get out in front of and possibly make some serious reductions in our water loss. It requires commitment. Pipe materials aren't cheap. As Benjie said, we have 2,200 service connections at 30 feet apiece. A progressive plan would be to achieve 150 replacements a year. Understand as well that these are in our neighborhood as we work. You will be affected. We're going up our existing pavement. We're going up our existing gravel roadways. We replace, we repair, we put in polyethylene and brass piping materials that have much longer life expectancy, and the hopeful significant reduction of water loss to our system. We have to continue down that path as hard as we continue seeking additional water supply. Now, with other notes on the additional water supply, wells. Will wells work for us? Will they not work for us? We have already drawdown tested a couple, 3 wells in the town that were existing and that did not show ample supply. We drilled an additional well, not for permittable purposes, that shows some promise and is still being evaluated. We're asking for continued commitment to develop 3 additional wells. We have used our hydrologic survey, geological analysis. We have brought in McGill Engineering. We began with them in 2018, bringing in well drillers, guys that know their business in this state, to evaluate and review the models that we have, visit on site the areas that we have, and determine the most profitable sites to drill wells. 18 to 19, 5 well sites were identified, preliminary processes, pricing, and usage feasibility studies were conducted. January of 2019, McGill and Associates contracted with us further to assist with the development of 3 of those 5 identified well sites. Our current plan is to simply move forward as judiciously as possible to develop the question of will those 3 sites provide us water. That's what we're looking for first. We're not yet talking about full developments. We're not talking about what might come next. We're talking about, can any one of these 3 sites provide us additional water supply? And that is our chief goal this coming year. It's in process now, as a matter of fact. I had a meeting with the state scheduled for yesterday afternoon to achieve preliminary well approval. Unfortunately, the weather turned them around from there, and they didn't come up. Next week, we're ready, they're ready to move forward with this process as well. 350,000 feet of water main in the town of Beech Mountain, water main. Additional 66,000 feet of service lines and high water loss. We have to approach this directly and systematically. We have to move forward with those. You know, we have 17,000 feet on the 2017 projects, 19,000 feet on the 2019 projects, thousands of feet. These do add up. Even the small ones at 350,000 feet. We're chipping away at this. We're making it better. We have to continue to do so. We'll be asking again for, let us identify and repair the problems that we can find. That's all that I have.
Questions for Dan?
No, I think we're good.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
So, Daniel, you're still actively seeking 3 additional wells
Yes,
on Beech Mountain?
on Beech Mountain.
And what are your expectations for each well, or a well,
Expectations
except for water?
are not great. In truth, what we have decided and we've set as a benchmark is we will further any test well that can produce more than 54,000 gallons per day. If it will not produce to that point, the cost-benefit analysis does not show that it would be a profitable site.
And what's the turnkey cost of a well?
It depends. It's really site-specific on the topography and placement on the map.
So is there an average cost with the
There's-
wells that
there's
we
really
previously
not.
have?
There's really not. You have to look at each one site by site to develop.
So how many wells, active wells do we have on the mountain now?
The town does not maintain any.
Okay.
I know that there are homeowners on the well that they're not active. On the current existing wells that are near the town, they're not in use.
Councilman, I think to answer your question, the proposal is to drill 3 test wells at a budgeted cost of about $50,000 total for the 3 wells. See if we get the drawdown numbers that Daniel talked about, and then one of 2 things. We find enough water to move into that option, or we check the box and say, we've done our due diligence, we've looked for water, and it's not there. And that is currently underway in the planning process now. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. Yep.
So just a quick question. We've feasibility taken a look at the difference between replacing and repair versus wells if it's looking like we're not generating much. My question is just digging or working with the wells versus putting that money back into the infrastructure. Is that's been something that,
Yes, and that's, as Bob just said, the 3 wells we're looking to put the 50,000 into this year. That's a very basic number. That's just enough to get a test done to see if we have water. The well costs then drastically increase after that, site specifically. But we will then have a volume of water to know if we wish to spend on it. And that's where the 54,000 obviously comes in as a minimum level. You know, and then we can compare each individual site for its volume of water against what it costs to build it. You know, obviously, additional water is our chief goal, but it also has to be something that's productive and something that we can count on into the future. Not only those two things, it has to be sensible for us to get that well water into our system and be able to use it.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could add to that, the two are not mutually exclusive. As Daniel said, we must continue and actually increase our efforts to put dollars towards fixing the infrastructure. That even if we have no leaks, we still need a second source of water. So the wells are the other side of the coin, if you will. We still need to and will continue to work on our infrastructure, but it's incumbent that we find a additional source of water for the town. So the two are not mutually exclusive. We must do both.
Okay.
The wells are part of that second piece of looking for a second water supply. We must do that before we can, before I can come to you and ask you for tens of millions of dollars to go to the Watauga River. We've got to either find the water.
So it's gotta be a place, it's gotta be part of it.
Or we don't. But we have to answer that question, and right now, all we've been doing is saying, well, we don't think there's water there. We need to put holes in the ground and find out. If there is, great. Then we'll make an analysis, as Daniel said, about the cost benefit if there's enough water. If there's not, that's not a waste of money. We need to answer that question because you and the taxpayers and the residents of Watauga County believe that's a viable source. We need to go figure that out. So we need to do both.
Gotcha, thank you.
Bob or Daniel, if we fix all the lines, we explore for all wells, what's our next option?
Regardless of fixing our water loss at this moment,
Correct.
as Benjie has pointed out, we still do not have adequate water supply. All right, the wells are right now, as far as we are concerned, that's our stopgap. That may give us, and it may help us in a drought in the coming future. It may give us a benefit. Predominantly in the western mountains, it will not. Some people strike it lucky. You know, some people hit the lottery as well. You know, we're not betting on that. We're going to continue in the due diligence. The full expectation is we have to have the raw water intake in order to move forward with the system viability. Regardless of what we find in the wells, regardless of our water loss, we have zero yield effective in Buckeye Creek.
What's the timeline on these 3 wells?
This year,
Any other questions? Aaron, anything?
No, we're good.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
We've got Harold Brady here he's the Water Supply Development Coordinator who wrote that report back in 2015, and I've asked him to be here today to update us on that report. Harold, thank you for coming.
Absolutely, Bob. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I'm Harold Brady. I work with the Division of Water Resources and the Department of Environmental Quality. I think Benjie and Robert, they covered a lot of the points. So some of what I'm going to say is maybe just a rehash. But so let me sort of start with how the state got involved working with Beach Mountain on this. And in 2010, there was the drought. I know in 2012, we were looking at the local water supply plans. We had conversations in 2011, 2012. We were looking at the local water supply plans, and the threshold we look at is when a system gets at 80% or above of its using it, when its demand is above what its supply, 80% or above of what its supply, what we're seeing from the plan, what its available supply is. That's when we reach out back to the system and say, all right, we need to work on what your future plan is here. And there's a House bill in the Senate that went through about 2010, House Bill 609, that established a water supply development program. And I'm the coordinator of that program in the department. So when I came into the project, I gathered up the available studies that had been done. There was a groundwater study that had been done. Benjie had done a safe yield study. So That information went into the document that Bob presented some excerpts from. I have some copies of that document from 2015 if you'd like a copy of it. I'd like to update it sometime soon, considering that we have the new 401 certification that just went through with the minimum releases out of Buckeye Lake. They've changed, and there's some other things that need some updates. But the document still holds true, I feel. So when we came in, we saw what the current safe yield estimate was, and at the time, with the minimum releases that were there, we looked at effectively the safe yield was zero. Benjie presented with some of the changes. I guess it's now around 0.2. Theoretically. A lot of math went into that. But the looking at the 2018 local water supply plan for Beach Mountain, there was a roughly 0.4 MGD, million gallons a day, was the average day. So we're still north of what the safe yield would theoretically be. Perhaps any more important, just as important, would be there's the max day of 0.9. So near 1 million gallons a day would be the max day. I think that was in July, around that time period. So as they pointed out, when I worked on that, the document, and I certainly worked on it collaboratively with other folks in the division. It certainly wasn't just from me. We looked at what a lot of the obvious options are, and it's not a full-blown environmental assessment. It was really just a statement of looking at the available information, what some of the obvious options are, including groundwater, which we've discussed, and other options. We determined that the Watauga River intake as a supplemental source appeared to be the most preferable for an obvious solution for a supplemental source. There have been numerous meetings that we've held since that time, since we got involved in 2014 with other state and federal agencies. As I believe Benjie pointed out, TVA would be the federal agency lead on any project such as that. This is an intake. DEQ would be the state lead on permitting a project like that. It's important, we touched on what the 7Q10 value. So in our administrative rules for the State Environmental Policy Act for the department, that's where the 20% of the 7Q10, that 7Q10 is just a statistic. It's a low flow statistic that we use. A lot of other agencies within the department use it as well. We look at the 20% of that low flow statistic when an intake is being proposed to put in. Any withdrawals above that 20% would require additional in-stream flow studies and additional effort. Really, before the state would approve something like that, it's really a threshold that we look at that we don't like to exceed 20% of the 7Q10. And this project at last time we worked with GS to get a geologic survey, with who owned the gauges, to get a value of what the 7Q10 is at that location. It was approximately 25 CFS. That's where that 17 MGD that Benjie pointed out. So looking at a 1 or 2 withdrawal intake would be below that 20% 7Q10 value. Let's see. It's currently classified at HQW. A water supply 4 is something that's been talked about as far as a reclassification of the water. My colleague Elizabeth Countess came up today with me. If you had any questions on the specifics of what that means, what that means for reclass, what some of the requirements would be to get that water body reclassified. And yeah, I covered the 401 certification. I think
Questions, council? Mayor?
I have one. So if I heard you correctly, you said in 2014, your agency recommended or suggested the Watauga intake
Yeah,
to be the
that-
most viable source?
that 2015 water availability study landed on that. That appeared to be of the options that we were aware of and looked into. That appeared to be the most the preferable option.
And that includes, and that's over drilling for wells as well?
It's looking at the wells as well. There was a at the time there was a limited in scope groundwater study that had been done and so for Beach Mountain. So I utilized that document and it said that there really likely was not a lot of potential for groundwater in the Beach Mountain area. So that's how we landed on that.
So you have some historical data on that?
With that study, that groundwater study that had been done in 2010, I think, 2011. Having said that, I have encouraged Robert and Daniel to, you know, if questions are being raised about the possibility of groundwater that within the town, encouraged to, you know, keep looking at groundwater. I mean, that would be if that works out, that would be a great option. But the data, the information that I've seen from that groundwater study, it wasn't positive.
Well, I guess the question is, if it comes down, push comes to shove, the state is willing to back up the study. As far as, if we need water, it's gotta come from Watauga.
So looking at other surface water sources, I mentioned the Elk River, that's further away than Watauga, smaller drainage area. We looked at interconnections. Banner Elk is close by, but they're on groundwater as well, and honestly, they couldn't supply what the demands are here in Beach Mountain. Boone is, maybe as a crow flies, it's not too far, but it's it's over hill and dale. So.
Right. All right. I'd like to, if we can get Elizabeth to come up, because I'm sure there's a question about environment. I'm sure some of the residents around Watauga want to know about the environment around it, and you can give us some information.
I do have a question I'd like you to answer for me, because I've heard two sides of it. The reclassification of the river, which would be required for the intake, would that improve the protection of the river or degrade the protection of the river?
So if we're looking at a potential water supply for, as Benjie had mentioned, and he showed a map of where that green hatched area came along the river,
Can you put it back
mile
up?
either side of it.
I can try.
You know.
So while Chief's looking for that, how many wells? So you said that you would encourage drilling for wells. When do you decide that you've exhausted, or the town's exhausted its resources on this if water isn't located?
That's hard to that's
May
hard to
not be a
say.
fair question, but I didn't know if you're looking at 3 wells, looking at 10 wells, looking at 20 wells. I mean, when do you give up? Say, there's no return on the investment with this.
I think that's a larger conversation. So I wouldn't say there's a specific number. It would be a larger conversation between the state and the water system on those options.
But the state doesn't have a minimum amount
No.
paid or a minimum number of wells.
No.
That's the water.
No.
Yeah, I could add that,
One more.
I mean, you're to supply 500,000 gallons a day, you would need to.
Get to the-
Yeah, okay. Just point out that by the state's rules, you need to provide what you would normally use in 24 hours within 12 hours to give the wells time to rest. So basically double. So 500,000 gallons a day is basically 350 gallons a minute, so you would need 700 gallons per minute of well capacity. That's, consistent all through dry times, not just a quick blow-off test, but a 24-hour drawdown is kind of a gauge for what you might expect. So you really want more than that. But anyway, 700 gallons per minute would be a true replacement for a zero-yield reservoir. Did that answer the question?
So what's been your experience with wells during a drought? What's the performance of it? Availability of water, has it still been strong? Is it minimal? Or do they run dry? Or some of all the above?
Yeah, it's some of all the above, and a lot of it has to do with where in the state we're talking about. Certainly in the eastern part of the state, most of the systems are on groundwater, and they're generally fine. A lot of times, even better than maybe a neighbor who's on surface water. Piedmont, you'll see reductions during times of drought. In the mountains, there aren't many large systems or even medium-sized systems that are on groundwater. So that, in that case, it's a little hard to say for a system the size of Beach Mountain, which is sending out 400,000 gallons a day.
So I don't know if this is a fair question, but I'll ask.
Okay.
So the report was provided to Beach Mountain in 2014. In your opinion, has anything changed between then and now? And the Watauga intake is the most viable option for the town?
Nothing significantly changed. There's different, the minimum releases are in place, revised minimum releases are in place now, and the town will be held to those. It's a new water plant, that's a positive. And the water lines are being replaced they're doing sections throughout. I stay in touch with Robert regularly to find out, Robert and Daniel, when water lines are being replaced. So as far as water efficiency, that's good, but that doesn't really solve the problem as we had talked about before. The safe yield of Buckeye Lake is below what the average day demands are. So that problem still exists.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so if we're looking at the map on the slide, that green hatch zone represents the area that the high-quality water, or HQW regulations, apply to. And in terms of new development, a water supply 4 isn't going to be adding additional protection to that area. But outside of that area, but still within the red shape, red outline shape that you can see, you would be getting additional protections coming into place. So in terms of new development, again, Benjie showed a slide that you would be having some density restrictions coming into place, some setback requirements coming into place. So I do want to mention also that once the water supply reclassification would become effective, regulations beyond just new development also come into play. So water supply, water quality standards would also apply for any discharge facilities that might want to come into this area as well. But again, those standards are for specific parameters, and so depending on what a facility would discharge, they may or may not be impacted. Depends what's in their wastewater, essentially. That answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Would that, in your opinion, we're not infecting the environment in any way by putting the intake there?
The idea or intent, at least behind the water supply regulations, is for protection of use of water supply. That's what drives those regulations. So that's their entire purpose.
So there'd be no impact, per se. There'd be no impact, per se, on the environment.
Well, I would have to say that there's an environmental assessment document that I think the town started down at one point before regulations associated with those kind of documents came into play. I don't think that would be required anymore in this case because of those regulations, but it was the purpose of that document to come up to assess what would be the environmental impacts of the project. So I'd say that would be where you get your guidance for, does this project impact the environment and how? It's a much bigger question than just a reclassification. It would be, how are the lines going to be, constructed, how's the plan can be, it's a much bigger picture of the project holistically.
So could you go into a little further detail about the discharge aspect of this?
Yeah, so within the water supply classifications, there are 5 of them. Okay, so water supply 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The first 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are for public water supply specifically. And water supply 4 is your least restrictive of your public water supply classifications. But all of them invoke water supply standards. The only difference between the 5 of them is what is the land management involved, what's involved for new development. So water supply standards are, they're concentrations set out for specific parameters. And again, depending on what a facility might discharge, I would have to find out from essentially you all what you think is going to be happening with any dischargers that might be coming into that red outlined area. Do you foresee any? If you don't, then the water supply regulations, at least from what we can project, wouldn't have an impact on any facility since none would be coming in. The question would be, do you have an outlook also long-term for where does the county, have an outlook for what development looks like in there? Have they looked out 20 years, 50 years? A lot would depend on the information that would come from them as to whether this would have an impact for any dischargers that would be coming into the area.
Okay. Anybody?
What kind of hardships would we be creating on any businesses or residents along that way?
Again, that's all going to be put in the context of projections for new development. So I don't know what the county's looking at for what they're going to be building in this area. Okay, so again, remember the regulations for new development only apply when a threshold of, when a sediment erosion control plan is required, which is generally when 1 acre or more of land is disturbed. Okay, so that's not your average house. Most people aren't clearing an entire acre to build a house. It's really, those are for bigger projects. So does the county have any of those in this area? I don't know, but it doesn't touch existing development. And again, there are no NPDES dischargers in that red area now. Are there any, projected again? I haven't gone down that road yet. And the reason I haven't is because the way a reclassification process starts out is from a request comes in from you all for us to look at the water quality, for us to contact the public water supply section to make sure it's suitable for treatment. Also, when you put that request in, that would have a resolution from the county saying, essentially giving their stance on the reclassification that, yes, indeed, we're going to be implementing this once it would become effective. So that ball all has to get rolling before, and those things have to be worked through before I would even get to the question of, okay, the water's suitable for treatment, it meets water quality standards, we have the resolution. then I'll start going down what's the physical impact of this rule.
Thank you.
If I can, I'd like to sort of double back on a question you had asked regarding impact. So in my section, we're looking at that 7Q10, the 20% of the 7Q10 to see what sort of impact there might be to the water body, making sure that there's plenty of flowing water in the Watauga River. But that's just my agency. So when it's time for the project to go in the ground, where there's a nationwide permit, Corps of Engineers nationwide permit for this, and there'll be a associated 401 certification. I know I'm throwing out a lot of jargon here, and I apologize. But there's permits, environmental permits from the state and the federal end. They pull in a lot of other agencies, Wildlife Resources Commission, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. A lot of folks go look at what level of impact there would be.
Thank you for the clarification.
So if this would have a negative impact on the Watauga River, I assume you guys would recognize it and shut it down, or not recommend it?
It depends on how de minimis the impacts might be viewed as by the agencies. And I mean, it's a permit, so it'll get public information on when there's a draft permit that goes out. So shutting it down it'd be a matter of approving or not approving a permit.
But you would still do checks and balances before the permit is approved to at least hit standards
Absolutely.
on the impact.
Yeah.
So there's a process involved
There's a
that's
process.
going to be a checks and balances type process to give us the information.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that 7Q10 value because that's really kind of what the piece of the pie that my group, or the branch that I work in, section I work in, we looked at that 20% of 7Q10 value. There are other issues that Wildlife Resources is concerned about. Certainly, any protected species would be from Fish and Wildlife Service. The Corps of Engineers is going to be looking at the construction of the project, what sort of impacts might be during the construction and minimizing those. So my point is there's a lot of, much like the production of that, the water availability study that I coordinated with lots of other folks on issuing a permit, there's a lot of coordination between a lot of different agencies and people.
If you do proceed with the intake and you come to USDA for funding, we do require environmental assessment.
What's the length of time for this?
Permitting length of time? Right now, as I understand it right now, it'd be under a nationwide permit, which is opposed to an individual permit, like an individually specific permit. Okay, sorry.
Stick to that. So also, the reclassification process is a rulemaking process. It takes about 2 years to get through because it involves, as I mentioned, having to put those 4 ingredients together, making sure that it meets water quality standards, that public water supply thinks it's suitable. We got your request in-house, probably an EA. Those all have to go and come together before I start rulemaking. And then that goes through public notice, public hearing, comment period. So it's a longer process than most people think it is. So that will take a while. Now, it's not to say that other things can't work in concert with that process, but that in and of itself is a lengthy process.
And what kind of fees are you looking at for this?
For the reclassification process, the state handles that. So all I ask, though, is that some of your representatives be at the Water Quality and EMC, which is Environmental Management Commission meetings. I am staff to them. So they have to approve that I take a rule out to public comment. I would also like some of your representatives at the hearing itself so that you can hear what your what folks have to say. And then, once we get comments in, those come back to our Environmental Management Commission for final approval. So, one other thing I think that's very important to mention is that even once it leaves my desk, there's still the option for folks, it only takes 10, to write into the legislature to ask that the rule go before the next legislative session. That can lengthen things even further. This is why we ask that any concerns, any parties that would have concerns, we try to identify very early in the process. That's why we ask that you go to the county and you get their feedback so that we know that, okay, that is one issue we're going to have to work with and so forth before we can go further down the process.
So the first step is go get with the county.
Yes, and to assemble a reclassification request. Benjie has already done quite a bit in the other work you've already done is fulfilled a lot of what the actual reclassification request form requires. But really it's just that form. We already have the map and the resolutions.
So if it comes down to a drought and becomes the seriousness is elevated to red and the city hasn't had the blessing from the county, does the state get involved?
It does, and that is within the public water section side of the house. I'm in the water quality standards side of the house, so and you might be able to help me out some in this, Harold, but we have had issues sometimes where drought impacts the community such that there has to be an emergency granting of water to them in some form, shape, or another.
Yeah.
Do you want to fill in on
Yeah,
that?
there have been occasions in the past. The ones that I've worked on have always been interconnections. Andersonville might have fallen into that, but surface water. But most of them have all been interconnections with a nearby town water system, and they run. You'll see there'll be a water line, a temporary water line run down the side of a highway to the town that's running dry. There's occasions of that. What concerns my group is the location of Beach Mountain and interconnecting. Doing something like that, I'm not sure the feasibility of it. In a short term manner. So it's a real concern.
Councilman, if I could just add, we had been told that we should look into, during those drought conditions, emergencies, we should tanker water to the town. And as luck would have it, in Thanksgiving of 2018, we had a dam failure, the valve at the bottom of the dam, and we emptied the single source of water. We contracted and brought tanker trucks up and ran those continuously, getting potable water from the town of Beach Mountain, getting potable water from Elk River, taking water out of the Watauga River, raw water, and tankering it up and putting it into our water plant. That was a all hands on deck, all out effort, no cost barred, and we ran out of water. We feel that we have checked that box, that we are unable to, in an emergency, tanker truck enough water to the top of Beach Mountain, either raw water or treated water, to make that a viable solution. We presented to council the results of that event, and the town, again, twice in 8 years, have critical water supply issues. One, the drought in 2010, one, the loss of the entire water supply in 2018. That's two catastrophic critical incidents that happened in 8 years. The claim that we can tanker water to the mountain has been proven to be not viable. And it wasn't a cost issue. It wasn't a number of trucks. We could not get enough water up the mountain into the system. And we've checked that box.
Mr. Brady, how long have you been working with Beach Mountain?
I believe Beach Mountain requested assistance in 2014. I know even prior to that, there was some engagement in 2013. The plan review engineers have been working, I know, with this issue with Beach Mountain since the 2010 drought. I became involved around 2014.
How many years have you been doing this?
A little over a decade.
Would you say you're a seasoned veteran? I know you'd like to say yes.
Seasoned.
So with what you've seen with Beach Mountain and with your experience with the mountain areas, the mountain regions, what's your recommendation on the next step Beach Mountain needs to take?
I think looking at the groundwater, looking at putting in test wells. Eric Hudson down in Public Water Supply section, he was planning to come up yesterday to be here next week. I think that's a great step because there may be some success with that, and that would be great if there is. Otherwise, it'd be good to check that box. As mentioned, I think that's a good next step. The continuing step is getting the
reclassification,
the unaccounted for water under control. That's a continuing step. That's the first step. That's the last step. That's throughout. But it's not, mountain water systems deal with this. There's a lot going on, a lot more going on with the pipes than and where they're located in the mountains than there is, say, in the coastal plain.
So if I remember the number earlier, that there was a loss of around 57%? And 47%? So with what?
57.
What did I say?
57.
Oh, did I say 57? No.
Yes.
I wrote. So, and there's going to be X amount of percentage of loss regardless of how good the system is. Is the average around 35 to 38?
I often think of the number in terms of the statewide value. So regionally, I'm not the best person to ask regionally. Statewide, we try to keep systems below 20%, but you don't have these types of issues in the coastal plain and in the Piedmont that you have in the mountains. And so I certainly wouldn't dispute a number if they of a third at all.
So, maybe my last question. So, from your recommendation, we need to work on the wells first, and it's a continuance of fixing the leaks. I would think that y'all's department is maybe taxed. Would it be an option that while we're working on the wells, because I think time is of the essence, if we do have, whenever, we're going to have another drought, whether it's next year or 10 years from now, whenever. So will we be putting the cart in front of the horse if we began working on a reclassification?
Well, we have to go to Watauga first.
Not at all, and I think the first step with that would be reaching out to the citizens of the county, coordinating with the county commissioners, obviously, but the citizens of the county, and let them know, give them the scientific information behind this, where Beach Mountain is, and engagement with the county, I think is.
The county's very much aware of the situation.
I see that.
We won't identify them.
That's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. It's a shared resource.
Correct. I think we need to work together on the project. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor and council, we're to the end. Put on the board the draft recommendations for the council. If you've got any questions, while we've got the experts assembled here, this would be a great time. I don't think I can get them back particularly if there's any snow like there was yesterday. They all called and said, are the roads okay? But we need to hear from you. It's not necessary that you take official action, but in this workshop format, I and the staff need to hear from you on what you would like us to do. We prepared a draft series with a timeline that we proposed. Your first decision really is whether you want to proceed with the Watauga River intake or put it on hold. That is always an option that I bring to you. If you decide to proceed, we want you to authorize staff and our attorney and engineer to submit preliminary plans and permit applications to the related agencies for the proper permits. We'd like permission to apply for funding, USDA or some other funding source that you feel is appropriate. We believe we need to look at the $15 to $20 million range. We'd like you to tell us to request the Watauga River watershed reclassification resolution be asked for from Watauga County and then apply for the reclassification. We need to investigate rights-of-way easements and acquire more as needed for the raw water main route and the intermediate pump station. The next one, extend lease on intake site or build on as per current term of lease. We have a site on the Watauga River that is currently leased to the town, long-term lease. We have to make a decision by 2023 to either extend that lease or build something on the site. So we'll need to determine what actions you wish us to take there to continue to have that site available. We need to meet with the power company. Obviously, this is in a borderline zone. Mountain Electric serves the area, but we need substantial amounts of power, and we need to get working on that. And then when those tasks are done, we propose that timeline below with some basically draft dates on what it would take to get started. You've heard that the reclassification is at least a 2-year process. We have told you that the Watauga River intake you should look at it no sooner than 3 and probably 5, and it may be even longer than that. So it's important, I think, that the town decide what we're going to do, not kick the can down the road as we've done in the past, and get some direction. I need to know what you want us to do on this issue, because it's not an easy project. It's not a project that will be done quickly. It'll have a lot of ups and downs to it. But in my opinion, we need to get started on something, because we're just a time away from the next drought or the next dam issue at the lake or some contamination. So we need some thoughts from you and direction from you on how you'd like us to proceed.
Well, I think the first, before all this, is get the information out to the public. A lot of citizens here are concerned about the whole project. And I think there's a lot, like you said earlier, there's a lot of misinformation. And I think we need to get the correct information out there, so that when we finally do sit down with the commissioners at the county, that they don't have to rent 6 buildings to get, so we can have our meeting. And so that the public will be aware of what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. So I think that should be number 1, and then work down your list.
We can certainly do that. As you remember at the beginning of the meeting, I said one of the things I need from you is authorization to reach out to professionals that can help us get that information out to the public in the proper form, and not rely upon myself or staff to try and do that. We talk in staff speak, and a lot of misinformation comes that way. So that would be one of the things I would ask for in the beginning of the
Public
process.
relations firm.
This way here, you don't have to put signs up in the windows and boom, you'll have all the information. I think that's the first thing we should work on. And then the timeline, I have no problem with the timeline. Does anybody do?
I agree with the timeline. I think the information and putting that information out will make it, it's not gonna make it an easy project, but at least being informed is gonna make a big difference. So I agree with the timeline.
Why?
Yeah. I mean, we'd like to make a motion, take a vote on this.
As long as we
or-
explore and exhaust all our options up here. And we
So,
go from there.
all in favor of the timeline?
Aye.
All in favor? Any opposed? Nobody opposed. There's your green light.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll begin immediately. Of course, I'll report to the council on the next council meeting, and we'll keep you informed every step of the way as we proceed. Expect to see this project in the upcoming budget hearings and proposal, particularly on the infrastructure repair and replacement. We're going to hit that pretty hard this year in the budget, and I'm going to present that to you soon. And expect to, please don't get sticker shock. It's a lot of work to be done, and we need to get that funded. So be prepared to see that here.
Do you have an estimated cost, Chief?
As much as you'll give me. No, I don't. I can't give you a number now until we finish with our staff meetings and run it through finance. And obviously, it's got to fit within the balanced budget. I just want you to be aware that we're going to come to you with some options on how we can attack this, as you've heard today from Daniel, moving forward. We'll have out on March 10th, I hope to bring to you approval, acceptance of the bid that we open this Thursday for the water line replacement, about 17,000 feet, and we'd like to get that approved and get started immediately. That'll be the first option that you'll be presented with on the 10th.
Chief, I think also a major concern would be that whichever firm we would go with public relations, would be able to ongoing keep the public informed, keep our area residents, our neighboring residents informed with that factual information of the process and where we are and what we are doing with the wells and or everything step by step, so that there is no misinformation or panic. That's my greatest concern. I think there are a lot of folks that were very and are very, very concerned at the way we're doing this. We need to make sure that we do this cautiously, and of course, we're going to do it the correct way. But I want to make sure that we can reassure our neighbors and anyone that would potentially be affected by this process the correct way and what we're doing with transparency, so that everyone knows.
We'll make sure that's clearly articulated with whatever firm we go with.
Okay, thank you.
And just one other suggestion on that PR firm, I would put it up on the website, the information that they put up, a separate part of our town website, so if anybody wants to read that information or find it, it's easily accessible.
Excellent, we'll do that.
Okay, I need a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
All in
Mr. Mayor,
favor?
this would include the case of the town of Boone versus Watauga County. To comply with the public disclosure, we have to name in the ongoing lawsuits we're going to discuss, and that will be one of the items.
Okay. So moved.
Sounds like you just made it.
Meeting adjourned temporarily.
Thank you for coming up here. Wonderful. Good to see you.
Everyone go to my office.
It goes to what I said, what was on the slide. Here's our classifications and how they vary.
see, you can see water supply 4. You can see hydraulic water. And compared to class.
Okay, that's good.
This is on our website, I just got it ready. You to go, I mean, I've talked to the government, they have the same information, and if you want me to help you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
No.
Your mics are on.
it's actually reconvene, not re-adjourn.
Yes, that's right.
Do we have to announce anything?
We don't have to.
Okay. Before you adjourn, Mayor, since we're not bringing the meeting back, we're just coming back, right? You have to. I just want to say thank you for allowing us and staff to make the presentation today. We got a wealth of information today, and we'll be able to move forward. So I want to thank all of you for spending your afternoon with us here.
Yes, sir.
And I think staff did a great job informing the public that
Yeah.
was here.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely,
that worked out very well, so well done on staff.
absolutely.
We truly appreciate that. I think there was a lot of information that a lot of folks out in the town are completely unaware of.
Take a motion to reconvene.
Motion.
Second? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. At this point, do we discuss what we, in closed session, or we just talk about the,
You don't necessarily have to. If you had approved a settlement of some sort, it does require that being disclosed.
okay?
But this action does not necessarily require any action at this point.
Okay. Any, bring up a motion to discuss Shane Park issue that came up today?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed? Chief, you want to fill
Sure.
everybody in? So
I
I was there, and so was most of the people.
Most of you were there. I've spoken to most of you today, but I'll, for the public, I'll reiterate what the issues are. The planning committee, as you know, voted today to ask the council to stop Shane Park and to relocate it. That was their motion. The information that was provided to the planning board was inaccurate, passionate, but inaccurate. And I wanted to make sure that the accurate information was out and let you know what your options are and what the costs might be. The planning board voted unanimously in April of 2018 to rezone Shane Park from residential to PS, which is public use. And the council took that recommendation and rezoned the land. At that point, the council at the time and the town manager at the time began signing contracts for design and engineering and expending funds, which has continued until present day. Where we stand today is we have a contract that's been signed in October with a change order that I approved Thursday. The total amount of that contract is $289,300. That is what is potentially at risk if we were to stop the project today. There is obviously an expectation that I would be able to recoup some of that from the contractor off this change order. There's been about $65,000 spent to date out of pocket that has mostly in design, engineering, and there's been some early preliminary work on the site. To stop the park, two things we have. The land was donated to the town about 3 years ago by Dr. Shane and his wife, and the land is deed restricted, and it's very specific on what the town has to do to that property, and basically what we have signed contracts for is exactly what is in that deed restriction. More importantly, if the town fails to do what is in that deed restriction, the deed says that the land reverts to the Shanes. The zoning would revert to residential, which means you could put a house there and the town really wouldn't have anything other than permitting say on it. And of course, since that time, we've drilled a well and put in a substantial amount of money in a well on that site that now would be in the middle of a residential zoning. In addition, there has been about approximately $137,000 of donations made to the Shane Park by the public. Stopping the park, arguably, we would have to return those donations, which we believe we have a fairly good accounting of who has done that. But there was cash donations made at dinners and things of that nature. It would be difficult, notwithstanding the bad will that we would have 3 years into the project when we've started construction to stop the project. It was articulated today at the planning committee that site is in a flood zone. As a flood zone is defined, it is not. The federal government puts out a flood zone map, and they list every property in the United States that's in a flood zone. I checked today after the meeting, that site is not on the flood zone map. It has flooded in the past. I reached out to staff that's been here a number of years, Robert Heaton, Riley Hatch. They recall on 3 occasions there being standing water on the site of measured in inches. They've never seen the 4 feet of water that was reported at the planning board today. They've never seen rushing water that would wash pipes and cinder blocks, as was articulated, into the lake. Not based on that discussion, but based on a discussion with the engineers in January, where we identified that this is a low-lying area that is prone to have standing water. I ordered the design to be raised, and we've raised the building, and now it used to be level, now we have to climb steps to get up, and that actually is part of the change order that I approved on Thursday. So with that information and a very impassioned plea this morning, they voted 3-2 to send a recommendation from the planning board to you to cancel the project. You certainly have that option to do that. I want to make sure you understand and have the information you need to make that decision. The contractor he told me at another meeting, he'll be installing the silt fencing tomorrow. They are in architectural and design, and they're ready to put the foundations in 2 to 3 weeks. I need to know pretty soon if you want to make a change, because every day that goes by, we lose more money. At least 200,000. I don't want to give you a number because it'll be wrong. We've got over $100,000 committed with invoices that will be coming in that I have to pay. We have the contract with the contractor that we can break. There's a penalty, and there's I don't know what that'll be, but we're in hundreds of thousands of dollars possibly at risk, plus the issue of returning the land and what do we do with the well. We do retain the right to maintain the well if we return the land to the Shanes. However, I need to build a building to cover the well, which was part of this project, and that is yet to be decided. That I'd have to turn over to legal on how and if we could do that.
Right now, the park is still sitting at a building, a park, and a parking lot, and no campsites.
Correct.
So the campsites went away, the trail.
Well, they didn't go away.
No, the campsites didn't go.
They didn't go away. They're not.
They're just not
We
part
have
of what we're
limited
working on
amount
right
of
now.
funding, because when I got this project, we were burning through the cash and not producing anything. As you know, I've reported it to you the last couple of meetings. So we didn't have a state permit, and so all the grandiose plans for the park did not meet the requirements of the WS2 water protection permit. So the things like the 2 buildings, the bathroom and the pump room, we've combined because we have to be within a 6% non-pervious requirement, and we're within a 0.5% now. So what we've done is we've reduced the parking to, I think it's 15
15
spaces, and we've reduced the amount of pavement. We've put the two buildings together to make one. We've removed the amphitheater. There is nothing else being built at this time because this council told me to put no more public money into the project. When this, if we continue, the available funds will be spent. The campsites that are anticipated, we will probably grub those out with staff.
Okay.
Because one of the requirements of Dr. Shane and his deed restriction was campsites. So, you know, the town has to put some campsites in. The design of platforms and I forget the term they used.
The
but
overlooks.
fancy camping, I can't do because of the impervious area. So we'll have natural, primitive campsites. So they haven't been removed, but they're not in this phase of construction.
So my other question, and correct me if I'm wrong on what I'm asking here. I know we're all sitting and talking about all this with Shane Park. This is still gonna come up March 10th, where we're gonna inform the public about the zoning and the flood zone and, or are we making a decision here and then we're done?
Well, March 10th is the plan.
You have a public hearing on an ordinance change for
Ordinance
Shane
change.
Park.
Right.
And you should expect to hear from the public then.
So that, and then you'll, as we mentioned, put together that it's not in a flood zone, because I think that's what the public really
Absolutely.
needs to understand.
If you want to go to the 10th and have that public hearing, and I will present the issues that we heard today and what the facts are, and what the finances are, and what the at-risk dollars are. Do that on the 10th.
I just feel like we're getting back into the situation that we did before, that nobody's here, and, you know, we're discussing this, which is great. I just don't know if we should make a decision without,
Well, we have to make a decision in a sense because the engineers and the architect and
Yeah, the
everybody
money.
else are looking,
There are people coming tomorrow.
they wanna put a shovel in April 1st. And so there's permitting and so we have to decide, do we stop or go forward? The rest of it, we can give the public the information.
okay,
I think to
But the
decide
other-
to go forward or not, we need to know look, how much money we're gonna lose if we stop right now.
Well,
We can't make an informed decision.
he's giving you pretty good information.
I can't give you an exact dollar amount because we have not talked to the contractor. We haven't negotiated that with the contractor. I did a preliminary one a month ago when we I stopped the project actually cold to remove the water feature. And at that time, he felt his contract was due to him of $118,000. I don't believe that would stand up, but he had substantial expenses backside that didn't put anything into the ground. So it's probably at a minimum $200,000
If we were to stop.
if we were to stop at risk. And then you'd have to decide what to do with the $137,000 of donations.
Has that money been set aside?
Yes, but you could arguably, if you say, well, you've got to give those back, that's another $137,000 that, quite frankly, we've accounted for and encumbered. Without negotiating with a contractor, I don't have a number, an
Yes,
exact number, but it's substantial.
I wanna make sure I'm understanding this correctly. It's a parking lot with bathrooms and a few campsites is what and that's all it's gonna be? There is no future growth?
That you know
we
of?
haven't committed any money. If
No,
we
but I'm
commit the
saying
money,
in
then
pure-
possible.
the
Well,
6% of
I'll tell you what-
we're allowed to do.
You're correct, and the 6% of impervious area is the controlling factor. You, as a council, future councils, future managers can't change that.
Okay.
That's a permit that we're being allowed by the state to build the park. We're about 0.5% below the 6%, we're about 5.5.
Yes, sir.
So there could be concrete slab with picnic tables or something like that. There can't be an amphitheater. There can't be stages.
Ropes course.
Well, ropes course, actually, if we put it in the dirt, isn't impervious.
Okay.
So you could do a ropes course. Anything that you left the soil open would not count against the 6%.
Yes, sir.
We don't have any more money after the parking lot and the bathroom and the pump
And
house.
how is this gonna look to Watauga County and the river keepers if we look like we're putting something that accordingly today at the planning board has never been done this close to drinking water?
Drinking water.
Well, I
I mean-
don't believe that was accurate. My opinion is that this is the best use for water quality that you could put there. It was residential, and the town rezoned it to PS, which is open park. A park would be an appropriate use of that land. There was no discussion about the 50 drain fields and septic tanks above us, on the same creek that feeds down. They're required by the state to have a 30-foot buffer, and they do. But for whatever reason, that wasn't discussed, the fact that we can't put a parking lot and a bathroom 100 feet from the stream.
But I'm saying for God knows what reason, if it does flood, the 4 feet that somebody reported, is that gonna look bad on us?
Well,
Or
if
long
it
term
floods
to-
4 feet, I need a new job, because I've built a building that is gonna be washed away. I don't, historically, the people that have told me have never seen that, and the evidence that's there would not support that.
Okay.
We heard that big metal pipes were being washed away today. The area used to be fenced. There was a lot of material that was kept there for years. The town utility used it as a staging area for old junk.
Okay.
No one had a problem with that.
Yes, sir.
And certainly if there was flooding potential washing old pipes, and they give me a list of things that were there, and it was just everything. There wasn't a concern there.
My concern, I just don't wanna jeopardize anything with the water
With the
intake.
water.
Right.
Cause that's our first priority.
I'm gonna start the ball, I'm gonna get the ball rolling. This has been the toughest decision that I've had to make since I've been on council. And I haven't been comfortable with Shane Park from day one. And me personally, I'm not in favor of it, and I'd rather take the hit up front, financially. I don't know if this makes, and I'm conservative. I think we need to be good stewards of our money, but I do not feel comfortable with this project, and I'm not in favor of moving forward. I'd rather take the financial hit. Hey, I'm a taxpayer up here too, and I don't want to see us waste $200,000 worth of money. And I think that whichever direction that we go in, whether we move forward or we decide to stop the project now, we're going to take heat from people. Or we're going to take more heat from one side versus the other. Just not, with the business experience that I've had and with things that I know that what can go wrong, I don't feel comfortable with it. And I don't feel comfortable moving forward.
All right, but just remember the amount of heat we got for 50,000. Can you imagine the amount of heat we're gonna get for 200,000?
Yeah, and
I don't
these
dis-
people
I don't
that
dispute
donated and
that.
the people that fundraise, we could end up with any other project up on this mountain of people saying, forget it.
Correct.
Because,
I mean, we've been talking about this thing for 3 years. We had two fundraisers.
And have nothing to show for it.
Well,
So, I mean, this,
it's now the time to show for it, and this is where we're at. I mean,
I don't have enough information yet. I'm not comfortable making the decision. And I think maybe we should probably have Bob or somebody reach out to Dr. Shane and see if he would consider the relocation of his park.
well,
that was one of my questions. Is
understand.
that a deed that has to be written that way? Or did they say they wanted it that way? Or like what Jimmy's saying, maybe we can go back to him and it doesn't have to be
We need to-
designated.
He might not know everything that we've discovered in the last 2
I'm
weeks
hoping he
because
watched today.
I have
I'm
such
finding this
concern.
out
I
in
have
2 weeks,
right.
and how, you said we've been working on this for 3 years, and there's a question today whether it's a flood zone or not?
well,
There's no excuse for that.
Well, there's no question. You're relying on a single person on the planning board who doesn't know what he's talking about. So don't say that we don't know. We do know. Nothing's changed. Dr. Shane, even if he wanted to move the park, there's no money. We can't move the park and build a new one unless you appropriate more money. I would love to build a park up here.
On a $400,000 piece of property.
You have to give me money. The money has been either encumbered or spent down there.
Yeah, but-
And it's if you stop the project, I understand Councilman Abernathy's comment, but that money is gone. We can't
Let
move
me
the
ask
park.
you this, the money that has been spent so far, is that the money that council approved? Is the money that's
The
just
pot.
sitting out there to finish it up, is the fundraising donations?
It's a pot of money. All the money has
Okay.
been accounted for, but it's in the budget, the final budget. And with the change order on Thursday, basically the budget is down to $20,000.
Gotcha, okay.
May I just remind the procedurally, Mayor Kaufman, that the planning board is a recommendation body, an advisory board, and their, vote of 3-2 today is what they're, presenting at your next meeting. So I just wanted to remind you that.
Also, you gotta remember also, we've already approved it. It came to the council, and the council approved the project with the recommendation of the planning board. So the council approved it at that time. So, in
And
reality.
we, as a new council, have stopped any future growth on it, so we've at least
Well,
curtailed
We've
at
drastically
this
changed the
point
plan.
where it is.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's gone from this to this.
I
That's
think
what
the
I'm
biggest
saying
thing
by
that
not
needs,
knowing.
what needs to get out there is the public needs to know it's not a flood zone. I think that's been, a lot of people haven't been like super supportive of the park, but all this information going out about a flood zone is gonna get a lot of people up in arms over it.
Also, the state has looked at the project, and we're working with the state regulation, is that correct?
Correct. That's why you are being asked to change the ordinance to allow camping and no water use at the park to comply with the state's requirements.
How did we get to where we are today without a state permit?
Poor management.
It's a good question.
When did we find out the 6% of impervious? Because I've talked to older council members. They were never aware of this.
January.
What was that?
January.
Of this year, right?
Yes, sir.
So, I don't know, and if this is water under the bridge, we'll move on, but if it's not, so.
I'm just thinking it was already approved. The money has already been started to be spent.
But you
The
can't,
budget's sitting over there. If we say no, then I will not fundraise, or, when people try to put a new park out here, the community's gonna go, well,
Yeah.
look what happened.
Yeah, good
But
stewards
if we
with the
say to
money.
move forward with it, we just say leave it with what was budgeted. If you ask me, I would love to put something up there, but, for $137,000, you can't do that. Maybe a swing, that's it.
But we can do better than that for $130,000.
you can't turn a shovel of dirt without a permit. That's discouraging.
Councilman, I can't speak for the past.
I understand.
Okay? All I can tell you is when I got this project, it was on life support. And we took what we were told to do by this council, and we took the budget that we were given, and we reduced the project. We took into consideration the environmental issues that were presented. We went to the state, which had not been done, and that's when we found out, Councilman McCarty, about the 6%. We further reduced the building because of that. Don't forget, there's a huge group that advises us on this project. And I reported it to you at the last council meeting. I'm not throwing any stones, but I didn't get any pushback. So I signed the contract on last Thursday with the change order within the budget money that I was given. And one person today from the planning board starts an impassioned plea with very bad information, shouldn't derail the project. However, the decision is yours. And I just wanted you to have the information, the correct information, so that you could make the decision.
You do me a favor, please, Chief? Will you straighten that picture up behind you?
That's what, I've been looking at that all the
Thanks. Been driving me crazy all day. Thank you, sir. You know, this is it's a double-edged sword now. I mean, we're kicking the can down the road. We've approved it.
Either decision
and
is
then
not gonna make people happy.
You made the change order.
So you just
There was no pushback, you know, a couple of weeks ago, whenever you changed the contract. I don't know why we're where we are today.
Well, we shouldn't be, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, we either,
The question is we had one guy on the planning board that decided that he wanted to make an issue where,
My only concern is if the decision has already been made with the changes, that we move forward with what we have. That's already been done. My only concern is, will this affect our water?
I mean, that's
Yeah.
what you have to ask. That's
Right.
the most important thing.
That's the
I
most
mean-
important
well,
thing.
the state has looked at, if the state is issuing a permit, it isn't gonna affect our water. That's the bottom line. The EPA is looking at this thing. The thing we're gonna do on March is the new change that they've required. So once we match that, we can't do anything more. We're not gonna affect our water. They're not gonna give us a permit if they know or think that we're gonna affect our water. I mean, we're dealing with state agencies here. It's just not some guy sitting at the planning board who decided that he doesn't like, worrying about the water when it's been sitting there forever and nobody worried about it then. He doesn't like us salting the roads because we don't get too many fish down when he wants to go fishing. So, do we stop salting roads because he doesn't like it?
No.
Well, that's my point. I mean, we're too far down this thing. We put a committee together for Shane Park. We've had about, 4 or 5 different meetings on Shane Park?
Well, at least I've had 4 or 5.
Right. And so, all of a sudden, this guy decides to come out of the woodwork, and now we're all having I'm not, but some people are having second thoughts because we're taking whatever he's saying for cash.
well, here's the problem I see, Mayor, is that that's the first time I ever called you mayor.
Yeah, I know.
Excuse me. Barry?
I felt it right here.
Let me rephrase that. Is that, as Chief said, this thing was on life support. And it was on life support, and it was thrown together. I mean, the state permit is probably one of the first things that should have been tackled to begin with. And even though I have full faith in what our interim manager is doing, and everything's going to be done to perfection, it's just, I think part of this, regardless of, someone that's complaining that there's, it's going to do something to the water or the fish or whatever it may be, the track record is lousy. And it just further illustrates what our interim manager said, is that it was on life support, and that's very concerning.
And there's no argument with that. You're 100%. But
I think we're at a point today that, it seems like the decision's already been made.
well, you're right, because we made it
So
2 months ago.
So do we have to vote on this, to whether we go
I
forward?
thought it
or-
was just a recommendation. Do we have to
No.
vote to move forward, or just
No.
wait until the 10th?
We're just giving.
Things will continue unless you vote to the contrary at this point.
Okay.
I believe the reason Mr. Pudney wanted to bring that to you is because the design professionals and other parties continue to move forward and expend money under their contracts.
Gotcha.
If you
Okay.
if you wish to to breach those contracts and then resolve the fallout from it.
So you say there's gonna be no more money spent on this project, that X amount of dollars has been allocated to it?
I don't have any more money. You have, you've made it clear to me that there will be no more money from this council, public money. That leaves fundraising from the private groups, and that has not, we haven't had any
So can you put
fundraising
it-
in a while.
Can you put a nice facility, with the dollars that are left in the piggy bank, can you put a nice facility down there and feel good about the structure that you're
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
put down there?
Yeah, the work we put together has been to build a first-class looking bathroom facility and enclose our pump. John Merritt did the design. That got cheapened. He spoke up. We've got that fixed. The design is very attractive. It's rustic. It's I think you've seen the elevations, but it's a rustic type building that's now elevated, wood, very nice. The parking lot is pavement. We had struggled with gravel or pavement. The water quality people came back to us and said, we'd prefer you make pavement. It was a surprise to me. Because the pavement can control the runoff. And then there's a buffer that's built in, a bio buffer is what they call it. It's plants and a swale and things like that to catch and filter the water before it goes into the lake. As it was explained to me, a gravel lot, the oils and grease from the cars would seep into the groundwater and eventually make its way to the lake. So we increased the change order to put pavement down. Then we reduced the size of the pavement because that's, seemed a budgetary decision to make that work. So you're getting a paved parking lot, 15 spaces, what I believe to be, or John Merritt believes to be, is actually more important, a very nice bathroom facility. It does enclose our pump, and it has a little deck around it. I think it looks very good. So.
What function is the well gonna serve?
You keep asking me these questions that I don't like. That well was designed for emergency water supply into the lake in times of drought. That's the function of that well.
We actually pull from it?
Don't ask him that
Don't
question.
ask that one.
I do when there's water in it.
When there's water in it, it works well.
Ourselves.
So, okay, let me ask, will that well be in use
When?
ever? Yes.
I hope so, because we have a substantial investment in that well.
I mean, we were told at one time that well was producing, I forget how many gallons per minute, and it was a lot.
It's not.
I was told it was being turned on every morning at 9 a.m.
Yeah, and turned off.
It's not.
It was turned on at 9, they closed at 9:01.
Yeah, there you go.
So is there any money?
The last time we ran the well at an extended period of time, we drew air.
Can any part of that pump be used elsewhere?
No.
No.
It's a 600-foot well. The pump is down 400 feet, and it's unique to that. Plus, we had to bring in three-phase power, three-phase controllers. It's a substantial investment that is unique to that site.
I mean, just the power alone was probably $30,000 bringing that in. But I guess
That I don't know.
I guess again,
But
never mind.
isn't,
that-
go ahead.
Is that one of the 3 wells? with
No,
Joe?
no,
Okay.
no. That,
Yeah.
I'll make sure.
But isn't Daniel was saying today that they're still gonna test it.
we're going to do a 24-hour drawdown, which is the gold standard for wells, that allows us to accurately calculate how much water is available. That's never been done on this well. In lieu of mobilizing a contractor to do this well, I asked that we do the 3 test wells that we talked about earlier and do a drawdown on those and include this well in that contract so that we can minimize our expense. So it hasn't been done, it will be done this year sometime. And then I'll have a better number for you on how it produces.
Yeah, and I'm gonna make this comment, don't
You
throw
make too
any,
many comments
don't
anyway.
throw anything at me, but I mean, this further just illustrates, you know, my dissatisfaction with this
Forget all
whole
that.
project.
We're going backwards.
Because we were given misleading information about how well the well worked, no pun intended, and how many gallons were coming out, you know, per minute.
Well,
And here we are.
I will have that information for you when we get the proper drawdown test done.
Chief, just curious, what's the annual maintenance gonna be? I know it's parking lot bathrooms, I'm just curious, estimated.
Well, we've calculated that at about $25,000.
Annually?
Annually. I've asked that question to be, or that amount to be finalized. I think it's high. They were including the snow removal and paving of the pavement area. We're going to put a gate up,
Yes, sir.
and when the park's not in use, we're gonna close it. So there may be times in the winter where we don't open the gate and therefore I don't plow snow.
Yeah.
Are we going to hire an employee to manage this?
That's not the plan.
no.
Can't afford it.
So what do we do now?
Well, the question is do we believe in our town manager?
Yeah, leave it to me.
I mean, well, no, I mean, it's not to throw you under the bus, but the question is, Wagner brought up the question is, the last town manager gave us wrong information. But my point is, do we believe in our town manager?
Do you believe what this one's telling you?
Who would control of what goes on with the park? I mean, I don't believe, my personal opinion is, I don't believe he would want to go forward with it if he honestly felt that it would hurt our water. And that's my two
Mayor,
cents.
I've spent a lot of time on Shane Park with a lot of people on the water control issue. I think the use of a park, the park we have planned, is the best possible use for that piece of property environmentally. It is passive, it is well-planned. We have to build a building around the pump. And you know the whole story about how we brought two buildings together to one. But there's when it was vacant land, it was in worse condition environmentally than it is under our present plan. We're improving it from what it was. It was full of industrial debris. So if you ask me, I believe this use is the best environmental use of the property. Plus, don't forget, you just spent $6.5 million on a state-of-the-art water treatment facility. Nobody is drinking the water out of Buckeye Lake. No one dips a cup, and we don't ship it to anybody's house. We process it through this state-of-the-art water treatment plant that the town put in place. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's little that can be done to Buckeye source water that plant can't treat. And in the past, there has been far more serious contaminations of the lake than what we're talking about potential here, and we've been able to process the water. The water we're sending out to the community is the best water, number 2 in the state.
Yeah, we've had quality tests on it.
Right.
Well, we test it every day.
Yeah.
I mean, it is tested as it goes out of the plant. That's a requirement. So,
All right, well, we've kicked this thing around enough. Question is, we go forward, yes or no?
Voting?
Hmm?
Leaving it be.
No, the vote is to stop it, right?
Yeah, so we don't need to vote, right?
Right.
We just
well, do we
leave it
stop it?
alone,
No.
or,
And I trust what Bob said.
Okay.
And I think he's gonna do a good job.
There you go, we go forward.
I trust your Bob.
I don't.
well, understand you'll revisit this on the 10th. And staff will bring a presentation to answer those questions that were raised today. And then if we don't hear from council any differently, we're proceeding. But understand that the work starts on site tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the contractor told me today he wants to start foundations April 1st. And it's a 90-day construction. And so we should be having a dedication, this summer.
Thank you for putting all this together today, Chief.
Exciting day.
Yep.
There was a lot of key information that was all really good. Not
It was-
only for us, but for the town and the public that
Well,
was.
the presentation was very thorough and well planned.
Call me mayor again, will you?
No, I'm not gonna do that again.
Before we adjourn, I need to hear one more. Can you play the tape back, please?
Mayor, may we adjourn?
All in motion to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye.
You object?